And we're doing some rear brakes, rotors, and caliper on a 07 Jeep Commander. Pretty sure it's 07. I'm going to be changing this caliper, so I got some vice grips on here real lightly on the brake hose, very lightly, just to keep that fluid from coming out on me and getting nasty. We got a 13 millimeter here on these caliper bolts. So we're going to go ahead and take them out. I'm going to try to do all this in real time. The lug nuts were 19 mil on one side, and the other side they were 21 mil. So somebody's changed the lug nuts around. I think they're supposed to be 19 millimeter on this. This guy's pretty rusty, but it's coming out now. There's one. Got the bottom one. This is so rusty. Before I even started, I wire brushed where the ears of the pads are a little bit. They're just so nasty. And the back of the banjo bolt, that brake hose bolt, and those caliper bolts. So those bolts are off. I'm going to take a screwdriver and see if the caliper will come off. They wore these down to grinding. The caliper was shot on the other side, and we're changing both calipers. That caliper actually pushed in, so that's pretty cool. We weren't worried about hurting the pads or the rotors by gouging it with a screwdriver. Not worried about that at all, because everything's getting replaced. And I just kind of pop these out. These slides, I always buy premium brake pads with new hardware. So I got new hardware for those. Now it's a matter of getting this rotor to come off. I sprayed a little PB blaster around the hub surface there. And because I'm not worried about hurting the rotor, I can hit on the friction surface to try to pop it off. There we go. Popped right off. That was really easy. Easier than the other side. I like it. E-brakes still have a little life. Pretty rusty, just like the rest of the vehicle. Now we got to clean all the rust off of where the new hardware will sit. I'm just going to use my little Dremel tool. Try to get this rust off. We live in the salt belt, so everything rusts around here. And that's why I use grease. Brake grease for everything. We're getting in these little grooves. Knocking off that rust. I got a little wire brush. If you leave the rust on there, it's really hard to get the new hardware on. And that kind of presses up against the pads and puts the ears of the pads, makes them too tight. All that rust. My Dremel tool is starting to die. There we go. Work for me, baby. Yeah, she's shot. Time for a new Dremel tool. That's the second one of those Dremel micros I've been through. They're really handy, but I abuse them. That should be pretty good. Got a lot of that rust off. Because we're in the salt belt, I'm going to put some grease where the hardware is going to sit so it doesn't rust up and expand and tighten on those pads. and lock them into place and wear your brakes out. You don't want that to happen. So just a little high temperature silicone based brake grease. I use Sil Glide by AGS. It's good stuff. Now we got these little guys. They got the little prongs. You gotta kind of line them up where they're gonna go. There we go. Old baby hammer. Make sure they're on there straight. You don't want the ears of the brake pads to seize up in place on these. If your hub is real rusty, make sure you wire wheel that. Now we've got ourselves a caliper to change. I believe that's a 14 millimeter. Oh, my 14 is jammed in another bolt. Let me grab a different 14. This caliper's going bye-bye, so I'm just going to use the air tool. Go. We got a new banjo bolt, so no worries on hurting any of that. Take this brake hose. Make sure your sealing surface is nice and clean. The rest of the brake hose, the metal part looks pretty rusty, but the sealing surface looks pretty good. We grab our new caliper. And we're gonna get the caliper all set up. If they don't come pre-greased with good grease, you don't want to grease these slides up in between the rubber seal and the slides. Make sure they slide easily. They should always slide easily. If you're not replacing your caliper, make sure those are free, sliding back and forth. Grease them up with some brake grease. And now, rotor time. You should always spray your rotor off with some brake cleaner. They come with some shipping oil. There we go, that's on there. What I'm going to do is just tighten down one lug nut. It just makes the job easier. Keeps that rotor straight. These calipers can be a little funny. Just a real light zip. And we've got our brake pads. The inner brake pad that clips into the caliper should be the same for both sides. Try not to get any of the grease on the friction surface of the brake pad. Here's one pad in. The other pad clips on these ears here. There's these little notches in the pad. They line up with the hole in the caliper. And it takes some force. There we go. They snapped into place. Make sure that pad's still sitting there. Perfect. Now we need these slides pushed all the way back. They're going to want to come forward on you a bit. when you line it up. So the bottom ears of these brake pads, they fit in first. You got to get those in first, that bottom side. You got to push this guy back. There we go. And push this guy back. The slide on the top, there we go, they slid in. You can see down here how the pad fits in, kind of wraps around there. That's why you got to put the bottom in first. Now I can line up the back of the bolts. Ooh, first try, threaded right in. Sometimes you got to do a little wiggle jiggle, try to find the hole in the mounting. The bolts go through. These ones, good to go. And yeah, the replacement bolts are 12 millimeter instead of 13. You can get those tightened up. Nice and tight. They are thin bolts, so don't over tighten them and snap them off in there. Seen people do that. There we go. Calipers on there. Now we just got to hook our brake hose up. Right in the back of this caliper, it came with a new banjo bolt for the brake hose. Get our size on that. It's probably going to be a 14 again. There we go. We got 2 copper washers. I had a truck in here where the guy tried doing brakes himself and didn't even put these washers on when he did the caliper. Ridiculous. So we put one washer on the bolt, slide it through the block. And we'll put the other washer on the other side of the block. Do not cross thread these. I'm gonna start it in as far as I can by hand. There we go, it should fit up in there. It's got this little notch that it fits on. And I got a 14 millimeter ratcheting wrench here. And it's not working, it's not ratcheting. Sweet. That's always great. I've got a bolt jammed in both my other 14s and my ratcheting wrench doesn't want to work. We'll get her tight and then maybe it'll work. It'll break free. These get worn out. There we go. Now it's ratcheting. You don't want, these are small threads. You don't want to strip them out inside the caliper, but you need to get it tight enough for those copper washers to do their job sealing. Let's get it nice and tight. You can always re-tighten it down the road if you don't have it tight enough. All right, so now our vice grips are off. And we've got, I believe, a 10 millimeter brake bleeder. We'll take the little cap off. A little rubber protector cap. And lefty loosey. Sometimes these are on here pretty tight. There we go. Now we got our bleeder open. All right, so caliper, brake pads, rotor, they're all on. If you got any grease on your rotor, spray it off with some brake cleaner. And we're all set. All we gotta do is bleed the brakes now. The bleeder's open. We got another video on brake bleeding, a couple of them. Everybody's got a video on brake bleeding. There's a lot of them out there if you don't know how. Make sure you prime the brake pedal. Anytime you do a brake job, if you didn't replace the caliper, you could just press the brake pedal down till the brake pads squeeze into the rotor. It's priming it, and then bleed your brakes.